You are listening to the J&T Marriage Podcast, where we talk real marriage, real problems, and real solutions. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to J&T Marriage Podcast. My name is Jared.
And I'm Tamara.
In this episode, we brought up the question of whether you should stay or leave your marriage. Couples seem to come across this question when, your relationship gets kind of difficult. You think, I didn't sign up for this. You may have just had a screaming match or something small, and you start asking, did I marry the right person? Would I be happier with someone else or with no one at all? Well, I hate to spoil it, but we want you to stay in your marriage. So we're going to share a little secret that helped us relieve some of the stress and anxiety from our relationship.
And we definitely want to be clear. This specific podcast is for couples that are experiencing frustration in their marriage. Maybe you've said, I'm not happy, or we've drifted apart, or we've grown apart. And you have this idea of creating a life without the other person, or even thinking about what it would be like to be single. This is not for couples that are experiencing any sort of abuse. If you're experiencing any abuse, we have provided resources for you in our show notes.
Now you have a story for us.
Like to hear? Here it goes. But seriously, on the first 6 years of our marriage, we didn't have communication skills whatsoever. Once the honeymoon phase is over, you kind of don't know each other anymore, and you're trying to figure out, who is this person I married? And in the midst of it, it just seems like getting a divorce or thinking of separating is something we did on a daily basis. Some of the time we really thought it was best, and other times I think we just did it out of anger to get a rise out of the other person. But about 8 years into our marriage, we had a really explosive argument over our son eating yogurt for dinner. And yeah, it's not a big deal, but Jared had told him he was eating what was cooked, and I was kind of at the point where I was like, you know what, yogurt's not that bad, he can have it, it's not a big deal. But it was to my husband, because he had already told him. So we got into this huge argument. He felt disrespected because I went over what he said, and we started arguing and just shouting at each other. Jared did what he did best, and that was shut down, and I did what I did best, and that was freaking out and leaving. It was one of those arguments where we just really thought about all the pain of any argument we ever had before, and we started thinking, did we marry the wrong person? And when I start having thoughts like that, I am a planner. So I was already planning what would life look like without Jared. I'd go to California. I'd take our son with me. I would go look at schools and job opportunities, and legit was preparing to move on with my life. After what felt like the longest night ever, we got back together and calmed down and really worked things out. Now, we had this realization that while we said for better or worse in our vows, we never really committed to that. And just to kind of let you know, our marriage, and we didn't have a wedding or anything. We legit woke up one day and said, hey, do you want to go get married? And so it was more of a formality of paperwork. And we ended the conversation with, well, we can always get divorced. So we had walked into the marriage with making a decision that we could always have a way out. But now there's a child involved. We had invested years. We really didn't want to leave the marriage, but we didn't know what to do. But we knew that we had to make a decision, because that decision of always having a way out was no longer serving us. So we made a decision right then and there on our RV porch that we were just going to take divorce off the table. And I'll admit that immediately it took stress and anxiety off our relationship and each other, because there was no more confusion. Are we staying married? Are we not staying married?
I can say that, when we were indecisive, it was not a good feeling, especially when you have to make a decision with your spouse. I mean, you all want to be on the same page. When you get asked a question and you find yourself saying, I don't know, that's really not an answer. So have you ever found yourself arguing about what restaurant to go to for dinner, while you're sitting in the car? I know we have, saying, I don't care, you choose. And that's kind of the same thing as saying, I don't know. So we tend to say that because we don't want to use our brains at that moment and come up with an answer. It feels good then, at the time, to not have to think about it, but that question is still left without an answer. But just know that when you don't make a decision, and you probably already know this, that there is never a solution. We can stay in limbo, and if there's a problem, the problem doesn't go away. If you see a small watermark on the ceiling in the bathroom, and 2 days later you notice it's gotten a little bigger, you wouldn't just let it get bigger and bigger until the ceiling just collapses. You see that there is a problem, and you make a decision to fix it. We want you to make that decision to be all in your marriage. That question on whether one of you is going to leave is no longer a question anymore. So just take divorce off the table. You'll see that it will free up that prefrontal cortex to come up with solutions and make decisions that help us honor our relationship. If we can't focus on making decisions, we are never going to unlock any clear or creative solutions to help your marriage move forward. So don't just stay stuck and static, because that is not fun.
So, as we may have mentioned or hinted around, both of us have been married before, and we got to a point where we were just not happy in our marriage. And the first thought that comes out is the same thought that when Jared and I got into an argument about yogurt is, would I be happier out of the marriage or with someone else or even just by myself? And I really think that this is how most people think, because it feels good to have a way out. But for the majority of people, we didn't marry people that we hated to be with. So there was definitely something about your spouse that you enjoyed at one point, but this is where miscommunication happens, or we say it, we drifted apart, we grew apart. We hear that so often. But what people don't think about is that we're the common denominator in all of our relationships. And that means if we're not happy in a relationship, we're just unhappy, and we're still that same person in or out of the relationship. And maybe a change in circumstances feels good short term. Eventually we follow our patterns and become unhappy again. And this is where we had gotten to in our relationship that day, fighting over yogurts. The deeper issue was there was doubt in our marriage, and we needed to make a decision to remove that doubt by asking, are we working on this or are we not?
I know taking divorce off the table changed us and our relationship. It helped us to grow as a couple and as individuals. So right now I'd like to share with you some of the benefits that we've experienced by taking divorce off the table, to making that decision. And one is that we now have fair arguments. And, what does that mean? I mean, can we always be right? No. So maybe in our own minds, we are never wrong. But we both have to realize that we have two different opinions and two different ways of processing information. It used to be that we would get into an argument and I would completely shut down because I didn't want to think about it. I don't want to think about any comebacks or anything. I'd just get angry and just think about, saying bad things, and I didn't want to do that. The saying goes, if you don't have anything nice to say, then just don't say it at all. And that's where I was at. So, that's what I did, and I just shut down. but that was the way I processed the information that was thrown at me. I just shut down, and later on, when I was left alone, then I would process it. Then I would think about it and think of what to do. And boy, I also had a hard time saying I'm sorry. I mean, maybe that was a pride thing. I never wanted to admit that it was my fault. But trust me, fellas, we can be wrong 50% of the time, all the time. So instead of me defaulting and going straight to the thought of divorce during those arguments, our brain can now go into figuring out solutions and begin talking about how we can manage our differences. And sometimes a simple apology can actually change an argument into a meaningful conversation.
So another benefit, and I'm sure this is probably one of Jared's favorites, is that life is less dramatic. This one was a big deal. I was super dramatic. I would have like complete meltdowns. I remember taking my clothes and throwing them all on the ground. It was just like a tantrum because I wanted to be seen and heard and loved, but I didn't know how to express that. And Jared, I just remember him being on the couch like deer in headlights. What just happened? But I had created so many stories in my mind about how Jared really didn't care about me. He didn't love me. And most of the time it was because of simple things. Again, like he didn't take out the trash. He didn't text me when he'd be home late from work. Or he didn't help out with something. And so I just created this little wall environment of I have to do everything by myself. And I was always really sure to let him know.
Yes, she did. And I'm glad those are over with.
Amen.
So another benefit is that we learn to ask for what we want. I've tried to read Tamara's mind, and I'm just terrible at it. But I'm sure you would also agree that it can be extremely helpful for both parties rather than trying to mind read and just communicate what you want. We never want to set our spouses up for failure expecting them to know what we want. And I'm sure that there was a time when you wanted your spouse to do something thinking, oh, if they see that, then I'm sure that they'll take care of it. But of course they didn't. And you go into attack mode, throwing out phrases like, you never help me, or I always have to. But you would have if you would have communicated with them, it would have taken away all the frustration and stopped an argument.
Yeah, there are a lot of times just thinking back that if I had asked him to do something to help me out because his priorities were just different than mine and he had no idea that it was a big deal to me. So communication is huge. And through all of this, we have definitely matured as individuals, and that's impacted our marriage completely and our relationship with our child. But learning that I'm responsible for my happiness, what kind of marriage I want to be in, and deciding who I want to be in the marriage, and always knowing that I have the ability to respond in a way that is in alignment and character with who I decided to be. You want to lash out, but if you decide to show up in a certain way, it's uncomfortable because it's not natural, but it becomes natural and it matures you emotionally.
Right. And also, we were able to learn so much about each other. And it all started with just taking divorce off the table. I mean, we've become best friends and we work really good together as a team. And we're two totally different people that can still have so much fun together. And that's pretty awesome. I mean, it's also taught us that, what it really means to love unconditionally. Our ability to love each other has grown so much without needing to or wanting to change the other person. And we ended up changing, anyway, because we wanted to.
Yeah, that was a huge one for me too, is the acceptance of who Jared is and realizing that who he is and who I wanted him to be was where all my pain was created. But when I really learned to just accept who he is and meet him where he's at and realize that we're in this together and we're growing together, I mean, it made a huge difference in just how I see him. So just to recap for today is you have to make a decision and honor that decision. Now, of course, like Jared mentioned, we advocate that you save your marriage and really create the type of relationship and future that you love because we think you deserve it and we know that it's possible. Another is to remember that you're the common denominator in all your relationships. So you might start noticing some patterns with maybe family members or friends or previous relationships, and especially with yourself. And it gives you an opportunity to become aware so you can say, you know what, I don't like how I'm showing up in that way. And here is how I want to show up in the future. And making a decision to stay married will definitely change you and your spouse because you're going to have to evolve when you no longer have the option for divorce. It just forces you to figure out how to solve miscommunication and really become a team. And that's where an amazing relationship is created, and you'll see a ripple effect in every area of your life.
All right, well, here we are at the end of this episode, and I hope you're super excited to start making changes. But the real changes comes with applying the information, because after all, application creates transformation. Now, a first step would start with what we did, and that's to sit down with your spouse and decide together to take divorce off the table. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.
Thank you for listening to the J&T Marriage Podcast. For any questions, comments, and available resources or marriage issues you'd like to hear on the show, please visit jandtmarriage.com. That's jandandtmarriage.com.